All right, very good. So, last week, if you will recall, we began a discussion on the prophets, and it served as kind of an introduction of various ideas to make sure that we understand as we are getting into a study of the prophets. And then I had intended to start going through some of these prophets, looking at them, and I realized I really have more that I want to say by way of introduction. More things about the prophets that I think are important for us to remember as we go through these, as we would read through these prophets. And so, because of that, I want to spend, some more time this evening looking at a further introduction for the prophets. Now, as you go through the prophets, by the way, the prophets, particularly the minor prophets, are often referred to as the white pages of the Bible. Why would they be called the white pages of the Bible? What's that? Okay. Jan says, is it like a phone book, the white pages? For some of y'all, a phone book is, it's a book that you, no. It's a very good guess, but no, that's actually not what it's not tied to the phone book. All right, so Julia just said they don't get studied very much. Now, this is probably a really bad example because this is a brand new Bible. But if you opened your Bible, or I'm sorry, if you close your Bible and you kind of look at the pages of the Bible, can you tell where the minor prophets are? On a lot of Bibles, you can, because it's the cleanest part of your pages right here. You know, whereas the rest, the New Testament is all kind of brownish and dirty, and then you have like the law gets used a lot and the Psalms and things like that. But for some people, the widest part of your pages, is going to be the prophets, particularly the minor prophets, because they just don't get touched very often. They don't get studied very often. They're often referred to as the white pages. So hopefully, through some of this introduction, some of this, we may start exploring more of what is in there and dirty our Bibles up just a little bit more on the outside so that these become part of what we study. All right, so let's talk about how to understand the prophets. As you open up, if you guys want to open up to Isaiah, we're going to look at something in Isaiah chapter 2 in just a moment. But if you open up your Bibles and you look, and by the way, well, I guess probably some of the digital editions will have this as well. You'll notice the way that it is printed is different, right? What does the offset of the print and the way that it's written, what does this relate if you're looking at it? All right, that what you're reading is poetry. A lot of the prophets, not all of them necessarily. I mean, if you flip through, you'll have a lot of sections in Jeremiah that aren't written in poetic form, and some in Ezekiel, but a lot of, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but a lot of the prophets is written in poetic form. Why is that? What's that? Because it's fun. Becky says, it might be fun, but that's not really the reason why. Okay, for memory purposes, Cliff says, there may be something to that, although I will say Hebrew poetry is not necessarily, the same as what we think of poetry-wise, where you memorize things based on, endings that stick together and things like that. Don't get me wrong. It does, with the parallelism that they use and things like that, it does help for memory purposes. But I think there's something else involved. Yeah, Dave? It was spoken originally. You mean that the prophet spoke it in poetic form? Is that what
Is recorded as poetry. I don't know. That's a guess.
No, it's a good guess. It's a good guess. I think I think you're getting closer with that. That it is definitely a rhetorical device that's being used. And maybe I would go more literary device, because it has more, I think, to do with what is the way it's written rather than spoken. Yeah, Becky. Okay, did it make it easier to learn by heart? And that goes to what Cliff was saying, to help to memorize. It's been a while since we did our half Psalms class, right? The class that got cut off due to COVID. And so, we'll be picking up Psalms again, by the way, relatively soon. Those of you who have cried yourselves to sleep for a few months after the Psalms class got cut off, and you just, it took you a while. Don't worry, we're going to come back to it. You can rejoice again. Yeah, Kelly?
Well, before you said that, I was thinking it, but once you said that, I was brave enough to maybe think I was right.
I did not understand
I said
what
before
you
you
just said.
said that I was wondering, and then you mentioned the Psalms, and it made me wonder if I was right, that aren't a bunch of the minor prophets like lamentations over different people's problems that are coming?
Okay.
And weren't laments sung more than said?
Yeah. So, yes, a lot of what you find, especially there's a book called Lamentations by Jeremiah, which includes laments or lamentations in it. And yeah, a lot of the prophets do, express some of the same ideas and thoughts that you find within the poetic books. Let me just, I guess, kind of suggest what's easier to write and to read, prose or poetry? Prose, by far and away, is much easier to write. It is much easier to read. Writing poetry, you have to put a lot of thought on how you do things, how it works, and then sometimes when you read it, you have to stop, slow down, and put a lot of thought into what is being expressed. There is at least this sense or this idea that when something is really important, and it's really important on the level of God important, that it is put into poetic form. What about the books of poetry? Why are they typically written in poetic form? Not because they're called the books of poetry, by the way. We call them the books of poetry because they're predominantly in poetic form. What are they all about? In fact, you rarely will hear me call them the books of poetry because I usually call them the books of wisdom. These are the books of wisdom. Wisdom is one of the highest, most important things for us to grasp and live in our lives. Therefore, the writing about wisdom is often an elevated type of writing. I think it's C.S. Lewis who talked about 3 different types of writing. There's phenomenological type of language, which is just everyday writing. We write about the way that we see things, the way that we understand things, just kind of regular just conversation and such. There's scientific language, where we're writing about very precise and scientific concepts and ideas, where we're being very exact. And then there is, I can't remember the exact word he used for it, but it is a poetic type of a language. And it's used for a higher level way of communicating thoughts and ideas. Well, let me ask this. Why would the prophets write their stuff frequently in poetic language? Yeah, Lorraine? Okay. Lorraine asked, would that be the way that God spoke? Very well could be. But I think that's pushing us definitely down the right path. The originator of the messages that are given they come from whom? From God. Is there a more important, higher level anything than God himself? No. So, a lot of the thus saith the Lord's that come through the mouths of the prophets or the hands of the prophets, as is the case, are going to come in the form of a high-level poetic language. It's harder to write. It's harder to read. It's harder to understand. Poetic language is full of what? And I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk more about this I guess we could talk about it right now. Poetic language is full of, symbolism, imagery, pictures, things that you say that are meant to represent something else, right? Isaiah chapter 2. Isaiah chapter 2. In the last days, this is verse 2. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established where? At the top of the mountains, and it will... it's going to be exalted, or it's going to be raised up above all the other hills, so that all the nations will stray, or will stream to it. And many will say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord. Now, if we are just reading this with strict phenomenological language, or even scientific language, what should we be anticipating and waiting for? What's going to happen? What's that? Okay, what's going to happen is that the mountain, there's going to be a big earthquake that's going to reestablish the size of the mountains and such, so that the mountain that holds the house of the Lord is going to raise up while the others around it come down. Right? That's what we're waiting for, isn't it? Isn't that the picture that Isaiah says? Is someday this mountain is going to be elevated and the others will come down, and then, the house of the Lord. Now, I have never been to the Holy Lands. Maybe some of you all who have can verify this. This is what I've been told, is that from a distance you can see where Jerusalem is, but from a distance you can't actually see the Temple Mount itself. Is that fair? Nobody's really speaking up. Is that fair? Okay. All right, Dave says that if you look, like from the east, if you're looking in, you see the Mount of Olives, but it blocks your view of the Temple Mount itself. So the whole picture here is that at some point, there's going to be a geographic upheaval that's going to take place, and this mountain will be raised up so that from a distance you can see the Temple Mount. Is that Isaiah's point? No. No, it's not a geographic function This isn't a scientific prediction. This is a symbol that says there's going to be a point in time in which the mountain that holds the house of the Lord will become the most important place there is, because it has the house of the Lord. And the house of the Lord is going to be done in such a way that the nations are going to see it, not literally, but figuratively, symbolically from a distance, and they will stream to the place where the house of the Lord is. So, it's to some degree, this is a time period that kind of finds its fulfillment when? Okay, Jan says at the resurrection of Christ. Yeah, New Testament writers kind of portray the era of the early church as the beginning of this time period that the prophets speak of in this way. So, all of this to say, when it comes to reading the prophets, we need to be very careful that we are not reading them with some kind of scientific exactitude. That we're not coming in and saying, well, clearly, when he says X, Y, or Z, he is literally saying that these things are going to have to take place. And you know, when we see these prophecies laid out, where all these 4 or 5 or 6 different functions are talked about, that we say, well, we need to have a one-to-one comparison, that this part has to be fulfilled, and this point has to be fulfilled, and this point has to be fulfilled, and this point, and this point, and we need to be able to draw lines from this to this, and this to this, and this to this, all the way across, because that's not how the prophets are operating. The prophets are trying to provide a picture, an ideal picture. They're not trying to give you a scientific one-to-one ratio of prophecy fulfillment. This is, by the way, what has led to the creation of one of the, I don't know, it may be one of the biggest end times views that exist today. Anybody know what that is? Okay, the rapture is a part of it. But the whole thing, the whole system, it's a mouthful to say. So who wants to say it? Say it again, Sean. All right, dispensational premillennialism. Yep. All right, it's a mouthful, right? But that is the thought or the belief system that Isaac said, has the rapture involved. Has the tribulation, the 7 years of tribulation, the battle of Armageddon, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus as he literally sits on a throne in Jerusalem, reigning for 1,000 years. You have the final battle at the end, before judgment. And before any of that can take place, what still has to be done? Israel has to be restored. The temple has to be rebuilt. Israel has to go back to their sacrificial systems and reset up everything. Why? Okay, say that again, Dave. Okay, because, the prophet, Dave said, because that's what the prophets say taken literally. Do the prophets say that Israel has to be restored? Okay, so Dave talked about the return from captivity that's talked about. Yeah. A lot of dispensational premillennialism is built upon the foundation that there are still promises that God made to Israel that are just flapping in the wind right now. They haven't been fulfilled. God made all kinds of promises, all kinds of prophecies, all kinds of predictions, all kinds of things through the prophets. That as you read through the prophets, and he said, hey, Judah, this is going to happen. Israel, this is going to happen. Jerusalem, Zion, this is going to take place. And then you read those and you look at world history and you say, well, that hasn't happened yet. Can God make a promise that doesn't come true? No. Therefore, let's follow our connections or our line of thought. If this is still yet to be fulfilled for the nation of Israel, and Israel doesn't yet exist, and the temple as of yet is destroyed, what has to happen? All of that has to come back to the way that it was, right? And this is, by the way, this is the bedrock upon which dispensational premillennialism is built. It's built on the fact that God still has unfulfilled prophecies for the nation of Israel, very specifically, because it said to Israel or to Judah or to Jerusalem, and it wasn't fulfilled before those things got destroyed, and therefore they believe all of this is going to come back, and then this prophecy and that prophecy, and we'll connect this dot, that dot, and then suddenly you've got this whole system of belief waiting for God to fulfill his prophecies. Let me suggest that a lot of that is built on a misreading of the prophets. It comes about because people sit down, read the prophets, and they say, oh, this is not fulfilled. This is not fulfilled. This is not fulfilled. Because they're looking at the prophecies from a very scientific way of looking at them. Whether it be the rising of the mountain above the other mountains, or the other mountains that are getting raised in order to prepare the way, whatever the case, for dispensational premillennialism, this is the biggest mistake. And so many of those prophecies that they're still waiting for, that are prophesied to Judah or Israel, really find their fulfillment where? And in Christ, in his church or his kingdom, right? Case in point, and then we'll move on, Jeremiah chapter 31 is a prophecy that's written to whom? Jeremiah 31 verse 31. All right, to Judah, right? Is it just Judah? For some reason I thought Israel was in there too, but yeah. All right, so a promise that is given to Israel and Judah. So this should be part of those promises that we are still waiting for, right? Because it's very specifically given. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their forefathers that they broke, even though I was a husband to them, all of that, right? So, where's the fulfillment of this promise to Judah and Israel? The author of Hebrews quotes this twice. He quotes Jeremiah 31 twice as bookends, right? He uses the inclusio there at the beginning of chapter 8 and then the middle of chapter 10. And he quotes Jeremiah 31 twice, saying, this is fulfilled in God's church. You are the fulfillment. You've received the new covenant. We've received this new covenant through Christ, who has given this covenant to us. This is a very clear example of how the New Testament authors understood that these things written for Judah, for Israel, are not necessarily meant to be only fulfilled through the very written things on the page, but it carries into God's people, whatever they're going to look like. Does that make sense? So a prophecy that is for Judah and for Israel very clearly is fulfilled in the church. And the Hebrews author makes that very clear. We receive that new covenant. All right, let's move on from this. We'll probably be coming back to this idea because it's really part of a lot of things. Also, as a part of this, we need to be careful about trying to determine lengths of time. And maybe I didn't say that well. Maybe the better way to say it is the prophets really don't care so much about lengths of time. Sometimes they'll give you something that's exact, like in Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 10. What time frame is given there? Okay, 70 years. In Jeremiah 29 and verse 10, he says, hey, y'all are going to be in captivity for 70 years. Does that then mean that you find the moment they go into captivity and you start a 70-year timer, and at the end of that timer it goes off and they should be gone? Is that his point? No. Again, and by the way, people spend a lot of time trying to say, okay, we need to have a 70-year time period, so how do we finagle this so that this is the beginning and this is the end, and how do we make that work so it's exactly 70 years? And that kind of misses the point. What God is saying, anytime that you see the number 7, something should ring a bell in your mind that says, hey, this is symbolic. This is a symbolic number right here. What you have is a perfected amount of time, right? 70 years. So, for the people that are hearing this, is he telling them to set a timer? What does that mean when he says it's going to be 70 years? What's he telling them? What's that? Okay, when the time's complete. Practically speaking, though, for them, what's he telling them? Yeah, when God's ready, is what Kelly said. What if it's just simply, it's going to be a long time? Don't expect this to be 2 years and then you're out, which is what the false prophet was saying, right? He's saying, no, it's not going to be 2 years and you come back. You might as well settle in. You got 70 years ahead of you, which for them, 70 years is a lifetime, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what Moses said? 70 by strength, 80 years? He basically is saying, this is the long haul. He's not trying to give an exact date. Yeah, I see you chuckling, Mike, and I was avoiding singling you and Dale out for the 70 years lifetime comment, but, don't worry. I'm not going to try to embarrass you guys with those types of comments. So, yay, I got you, yeah. So understand, you have that. Isaiah 7, we talked about this fairly recently in verse 14, when he gives a time frame for the events that are going to come, and he says, look, a virgin is going to conceive, have a child, and by the time that he is eating, curds and such, these events are going to take place. The kingdoms that you're worried about, you won't have to worry about them any longer. But when we try to be too particular with it, what we're going to find is we're missing the point. This isn't scientific, exact language. He's painting pictures with words for us to understand. Now, if they choose, the writers can use a high level of specificity, but they typically just don't. Oftentimes, you might just have a dream where there's a statue, and just in a short little period of time, you have a statue that gets blown up, right? You talked about that in Daniel. How many years does that statue cover? Something like 600 years, isn't it? From the time of the rise of Nebuchadnezzar in 605 to the time of Jesus and the rise of the Messianic kingdom that comes about starting in around AD 30. Yeah. So, just understand, they're not trying to give timelines and chronologies and such. All right. Let's see here. Now, all Scripture is what? All Scripture is inspired by God, and it is profitable, right? So, everyone believes that to be the case, right? Okay. All right. This is not a setup, by the way. I believe that too, okay? I know I'm saying this like it's a setup. Don't hear what I'm not saying, right? Absolutely. All Scripture is profitable. All Scripture is useful. Every bit of this, including the white pages, we should be able to open up to and look at, understand, and learn something about God and God's people. All right. Except, does that mean, is Paul saying that everything in Scripture is specifically applicable? By saying that, does he mean that we should be able to open up to all of these prophets and prophecies and say, oh, Paul is writing this for me and for my life? We should have people going like, no, that's clearly not the case, right? All of these prophets are writing in a moment in time. They're writing under certain circumstances to certain people who needed to hear a message. And quite frankly, this message for these people, in a short amount of time, a lot of this message is going to become obsolete for them, is it not? When he tells someone, hey, if you don't get your act together, God is going to raise up an adversary against you. And then 40 years down the road, an adversary comes up against them the way that God said he was going to do it. At that point, do they still need to go back and read that warning that was given and say, oh no, we should get our act together? It's too late at that point, right? I mean, I think we understand this. We get this. And so we need to be very careful that we don't read through the prophets and find some things that sound really good and pull those out. And I don't know, there may be places that, we could find where this could take place. Like, let's see here. Jeremiah 29, maybe? I don't know. If you turn over to Jeremiah chapter 29. Let's see here. Maybe if we start in verse 11, Jeremiah 29, verse 11. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. How many of y'all have heard that before? Jeremiah 29:11, right? How many of y'all have seen that written like on little things on Facebook or graduation cards or things, that says, God says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. What are those plans, by the way, that God has for them? All right, Sean just read verse 10. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. So, all of those graduation cards, God says, I know the plans I have for you. So when 70 years are finished, I'm going to fulfill these plans that I have for you, right? Yeah, this whole section right here is written in a very specific circumstance to a very specific people. And what is the point of Jeremiah 29, by the way? I didn't ask you to read this beforehand, so I know that's kind of unfair. What's that? Okay, go ahead and live in the land. Yeah, who wrote this, by the way? Okay, this is from Jeremiah to whom? All right, the people in captivity. Was Jeremiah a prophet for the people in captivity? Okay, Jeremiah was the prophet back in Judah, right? He didn't go to captivity. That's Ezekiel's territory. But chapter 29 is a letter. Just this one chapter, it's a letter that God wanted Jeremiah to write, send to the captives who are in exile, and tell them, hey, don't worry. I've got a plan for you as a people, but it's going to be a long time until it comes to fruition. For you, exactly what Lorraine said just a second ago, for you, settle down, build yourself a home here where you are, do good for the people that you are under. Do good for the people of Babylon, because that will then result in good for you. He's basically telling them, don't get antsy, don't think you're coming out right away. Yeah, I still have plans for you, but they're far off. For right now, my plan for you is to benefit the people you're around, right? So, is this passage then a passage that says, hey, you know what, Connie? God has a very specific plan just for you. Is that what this passage is saying? Yeah, go ahead. Mike.
I think clearly not. I mean, that isn't, we aren't in captivity. We aren't supposed to settle in. It does tell us how God deals with his people in certain kinds of situations. So there's something we can learn from it, of course, but it isn't specific. That's language. Specific language isn't meant to forecast our future.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to realize this you is not singular. This is a group you. This isn't talking about their individual destiny, that God says, I have a very specific destiny for you. And yeah, as Mike said, is it profitable to us in some way? Sure. Can we see something about God and how God works among his people? Absolutely. That is a part of this. But it's not such a part that we're able to lift the verbiage out and plop the verbiage over here and say, this applies in this way. Does everybody kind of see the difference, between that? We need to be very careful in the way that we are trying to apply these types of passages. Our job is to find the timeless principles, not to focus in on the specifics. And so we need to allow the things that are specific to the nations to be just that, without trying to find a way to make them specific for us. The question that we always need to ask, and by the way, I say this whether we're studying the prophets, or we're studying Paul's letters, or we're studying the Gospels, or we're studying whatever, the question first and foremost that we need to ask, what was this supposed to mean for the original audience? and what did they do with it? How did they apply it? What did this do for them? And that will help us to understand. All right, does all that make sense? Any questions on any of that before I get into a chronology of the various prophets? Okay. By the way, I'm not going to give specific dates for the prophets as we go into them on an individual basis. I'll probably provide more information. This is going to be much more loose. For me, as I think it is, and people disagree, and that's fine. They could be wrong. I mean, that's their prerogative, right? No. At least the way that I see it, which one is the earliest of the writing prophets? Anybody know? No? Because the Torah wouldn't, Josie said Moses, which is, yes, a prophet who is the earliest, but it's not in what we call the, quote, writing prophets. So out of what we call the writing prophets, which one's the earliest? Joel? I actually have Joel. I have heard people say that, by the way. You're not by yourself. I put Joel among the latest. Yeah, Sue?
Was Jonah a writing prophet?
Jonah would be considered part of the writing prophets. Now, I love the way you asked the question, because who wrote Jonah? It could have been. We don't know. Jonah is not attributed to anyone in particular. It's a prophet about, or it's a book about the prophet Jonah and his story, right? If Jonah did write it, then he did a really, really good job of allowing himself to be painted in a very poor light, right? So I think kind of Kelly said probably not Jonah. That may be accurate. But at least Jonah, if he's considered, would be up here as the very earliest, in my opinion. Jonah is going to a Nineveh before, I believe, the leader named Tiglath-Pileser, and I know it's been a few years since we talked about this when we studied Jonah, but he went into power, 745, I think, is when he went into power. So, Jonah, I believe, was written before 745 and was written before Assyria was a threat. At that time, they were just kind of another nation out there. So I would put Jonah there. All right, very good, Sue. So after Jonah, and these are the ones that are leading up to Assyria. And I use the word captivity loosely. It's not like they went into captivity then came back out of it. Maybe I should put the Assyrian threat. Maybe that would make sense as well. But leading up to it, so leading up to the Assyrian threat would be Hosea. And Hosea was predominantly writing to whom? Anybody know? Almost all of these you have to 50-50 shot. Some of them, though, if you chose one of those two, you might be wrong, but that's very, very rare. So, Hosea, someone give me him. Israel, very good, yes. So you have Hosea for Israel, and then at the same time you have Amos. Now, who was Amos writing to? Wrong. Nice try. Also Israel, right? Yeah. Isaac fell for my trap. Yeah, I said it, I laid it, I figured it was going to spring on somebody, and Isaac just went with all the gusto and just knew exactly that it was going to be Judah, but no, it's Israel. So these two are sent to Israel. In fact, Amos comes from Judah to go up to Israel. So you have then during the Assyrian threat, you have Micah. And who does Micah write to? Someone say Israel? Okay. No, that's incorrect. Judah, yes, nailed it, Isaac. Good job. All right. But then you have also Isaiah, who is predominantly writing to whom? Judah, yes. All right, so these are the ones that really have to do with the Assyrian threat. What's the next big threat? Okay, so now you have I'm going to change the word to threat because I like that better. The Babylonian threat. So now you have the leading up to. And the first one is going to be Nahum. And who's Nahum written to? Huh? Okay. Yes. Is it a threat or is it a writing against Judah? No, Lorraine, who's it written against? Yeah, Nahum writes against Nineveh, but who's it given to? Is it sent to Nineveh? No, it's given to Judah, right? So, if you guys remember from last week, Fairbairns, the three areas of conditionality. If there is a warning that's given, but it's not given to the nation, is it conditional? It is not conditional. And that's what Nahum is. Nahum gives the warning, but he does not give it to Nineveh. It's never meant to go to Nineveh. It is only meant for Judah to have to see and to understand. All right. Also, you have during this time, I'm running out of board space here, Zephaniah and Habakkuk. Why am I not asking you about these guys? Who they're written to? Because there's not enough space on the board? Thank you for playing. Nice try. Why else? Yeah, Kelly? Why not? All right, Kelly says because they can't be writing to Israel anymore. Israel's gone at this point, right? So there are no more warnings to the nation of Israel. So you have the leading up to, you have the writings that are during, and that would be, first of all, Daniel, which that's really interesting, because if you were to go and look at the order of the Hebrew Bible, remember we talked about that last week, the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the law, the prophets, and the writings, where would you you would expect Daniel to be in the prophets. Guess where Daniel is not? He's not in the prophets. Daniel is in the writings. What we've done in our order is we've taken Daniel and we've slotted him between what the Jews, the Jewish Bible, considered to be the four major prophets, and then we slot Daniel in there, and then you have what's called the 12. They put all the minor prophets on a single scroll that's called the 12. So, that's just a little tidbit there, free of charge, that I find pretty interesting. But you also have Ezekiel and Jeremiah, who also wrote what? Not just Jeremiah, but Lamentations. And then Obadiah. So all of these would be during the Babylonian captivity. And then finally, you have the period of restoration to the land. In this period, you have Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and there's a lot of debate on this, and Dave brought this out earlier, but I put Joel here. Although some people put Joel much earlier, and I'm pretty sure I've even read as early as what Dave said as one of the earliest of them. Okay, boy, we are so quickly running out of time. There's at least, there's a couple more things I want to get across. One thing is very important, and this won't take long. The prophets are not exemplars. What do I mean by that? What's an exemplar? Yeah. They are not set out as an illustration of the way that people should be. That's not their role. The prophets served a very, very specific function within a group of covenant people to perform a very specific role. All the sermons that you've heard on the "Here am I, send me," you've heard those, right? From Isaiah chapter 6, the "Here am I, send me," and all of those types of things. You do not want that. And that's not even what is set out for us. Because the prophets are very, very specifically given by God in a very specific circumstance to these people, and their lives were horrific because of their role that was given to them by God. Maybe you can apply a principle, bring a principle out, but I would venture to say that the call of the prophets is sacred ground. It's a very, very limited number of people in a very, very specific type of circumstance that are given in these circumstances, and we're not meant to say, someday I will be an Isaiah, or someday I will be a Habakkuk, or someday I will be this or be that, be a Jeremiah or an Ezekiel. I guess a lot of them don't have, only really the main ones have their calls that are specifically given. We shouldn't read them in that way, that someday I will be a prophet. I think that's a misreading of what it is that the call of these prophets was all about, and the sacred nature of what God is doing. Nobody else could do. I might even go so far as to put it akin to saying, someday I will be the king of Judah. Someday I will take this elevated position, by which certain things are going to happen. It's not my place to make that decision. And very clearly, God has already done that in his day, or in their day, and in their time. So that's one thing. And then one more thing before we close up, and this is one that we could dovetail into all kinds of discussions, so it's good that we're doing it when we don't have the time to do that. Be very careful with messianic prophecies. I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase here. Some people suggest, Edersheim puts in like 456 messianic prophecies. Usually people will count between 200 and 400 messianic prophecies, and they use it as an apologetic to say, look, Jesus fulfills all 323 of these. Therefore, he must be the Messiah. You know, and it's used in this kind of way. Who else could possibly fulfill all of these? And let me suggest that is not the point of those prophecies. And of course he fulfills them. Because what the prophets are doing, they're not creating little predictive points out there that you look at and you say, check, 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 all of that. What they're doing is they are painting a picture of what the Messianic kingdom is going to be, what it's going to look like. What is the Messiah going to be like? What is he going to look like? What is his suffering going to look like? What are his enemies going to be like? And it's just painting and it's weaving a tapestry of all of these things so that when Jesus comes on the scene, should it surprise us that that's what he looks like? No, because he's the Messiah, right? They're not creating an apologetic to say, well, since we have 323 of these things, then we know. It's a, guys, this is what the Messianic kingdom will look like. And when he comes and you compare Jesus and the church and everything else back to what they said, not a point-by-point thing, but a picture-to-picture comparison, you say, this is what it is. Does that make sense? And often it's in very figurative language. And we talked about that. All right, there's a little more to say on it, but that's okay. At this point, let's see here. All right, questions or comments on any of that we talked about this evening? Okay.